Hi, my name's Chris Scott, and this interview was recorded for the UK Wine Show. For the latest news and terms and conditions, go to ukwineshow.co.uk. Hi, my name's Chris Scott, and I'm here with Alistair Nesbitt. How are you, Alistair?
Good, thank you, Chris.
Excellent. You're getting an old hand at it now. This is your third interview with us. So far, we've talked about climate change. We've talked about your new modelling that you're doing.
Yeah.
And one of the things we touched on last week was frost.
Yes.
Frost is obviously, we identified as probably one of the key problems to vineyards and one of the key problems that can be managed by vineyards as well. Yeah. There's not much you can do about rain. If it rains in the wrong time, it rains.
You're right. Absolutely right.
Although, to be sure, I have seen vineyards in Japan, cashew grape, where they put little hats on every grape. Have you seen those?
I haven't seen those, but I am aware that, that there's work going on and there's cloches available in the UK.
What?
Cloches, so coverings, if you like, for vines that will both increase temperature and protect those vines from rainfall.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have people been using that?
Yeah, they have. Yeah, and the trials. If you get opportunity to speak to Richard Smart, Dr. Richard Smart,
I know Richard.
and I know he's advancing that now. But there are systems out there to protect against rain. How viable they are over bigger areas, I don't know. I think the return on investment's probably good, but you'd have to speak to an expert about those. What I can tell you we are doing is looking. Comes back to this mapping we've talked about before. Is you can't stop rain. You're right. It's difficult. Even if you protect your vine, you've still got water on the ground, disease pressure, etc., etc. But let's look for areas in the UK that we can grow grapes in that have less rainfall during the critical periods. There's a starting point.
Yeah. Hey, what about Camel Valley? Do you know their site? Because they're right on the coast, on the west coast down Cornwall ways. Bob seems to think it's quite a rain shelter down there, but I always think, West Coast, there's a reason why people on the West Coast have webbed fingers.
I'll be honest with you, Chris, I don't know. I think many, many years ago I popped in for a glass, but I don't know the site well enough to know, or the area actually, in terms of whether it's in a rain shadow or not.
Okay. Well, let's talk about frost anyway.
Yeah.
So I've done some interviews with Stu Powell.
Stu Powell, Dr. Stu Powell.
Dr. Stu Powell, done that, proper doctor, about frost, because frost flows like water. That's the way I think about it. It comes down the hill and it pools in areas, like a lake of frost, and you need to have drainage if you don't want to have your vineyards in the pooling and all that sort of stuff. Is that the way you look at it?
So two different types of frost to start with. So you've got advection frosts, which are cold air masses coming in. So sometimes you turn the weather forecast on and you hear Arctic blasts. Mm-hmm. That's massive cold air coming into an area. We had them last spring and a lot of vineyards were affected by them. And really, there's nothing you can do about them. That's just a cold air swamping an area. Very little you can do. Advection frosts are quite rare. I should say that, one every 4 or 5 years during that critical period for vines, sort of April, May time, in England. Radiation frosts, which are much more common, happen almost every year. We can do something about. And you're right, there is a...
Well, what's a radiation frost?
Radiation frost, we're talking there about cold air coming up from the ground when we have clear nights with no wind, very little air movement, no clouds, cold air radiating up from the ground and building up, more like Lego blocks than water, stacking up from the ground. And if that cold air builds up to above the height of buds on a vine, it will negatively affect those. It can damage them, it can kill them, depending on the temperature and how long it's there and the stage of bud burst and the variety and everything else.
Yeah.
Okay, so radiation frosts are quite different. We get them a lot in the UK.
Okay, just so I can understand that. So you're talking about, the first one was...
Advection frosts.
Advection, I don't know the term. Yeah. Advection frost. And that's an Arctic blast coming down. It's going to be -5 degrees. Doesn't matter. It's going to be cold. Yeah, and then you've got what I would normally call as a typical frost, where you've got ground frost.
That's right.
With an inversion layer where it's a little bit warmer in the air above.
That's great. So if you think about radiation frost conditions being the opposite to normal. So normally we've got, as we go up from the ground, the air gets colder. Okay, under radiation frost conditions, it's reversed. So as you go up, you hit an inversion layer, and above that inversion layer, you have the warm air, and the cold air layer is lower. Cold air is denser. Therefore, it stays closer to the ground and it stacks up from the ground northwards, upwards.
Yeah. And that's the stuff that flows like water. It'll go down a hill and...
That's right, because cold air is denser than the warm air, If you're on the side of a hill, it will build and flow down that slope of the hill. You're right, in the same pattern as water would. And actually, as it flows down, you can sometimes measure it. If you go out on a side of a hill under radiation conditions and you hold a lighter or a match 10 centimetres above the ground, you'll see the flame point downhill. And that's a result of what we call a katabatic wind. And the katabatic wind is this cold air flowing down off a site. So traditional theory of where you plant a vineyard, on a side of a slope where cold air will just drain and it won't build up. There's nothing to stop it. What we find in England is a lot of vineyards have hedges, woodland, barriers, buildings, fences towards the bottom of their site, and that stops that cold air flowing out. And it builds up, like Lego blocks, higher than the barrier that's stopping it. And as it builds up, it can potentially swamp, or we call it a cold air lake. It fills into the vineyard area, and that's when damage can occur to vines.
Okay, so some of the work in terms of assessing a vineyard is saying, well, if you want to avoid frost, take that hedge out.
It can be, yeah. Sometimes we would recommend keeping a hedge in.
To channel it and control the frost.
That could be done as well, yeah. Or we could put artificial barriers in to control, to try and channel that cold air. But again, vineyards in the UK, let's say you're planted in a valley, okay, and you've got a hedge towards the bottom of that valley. Now, naturally, you might think you want to remove that hedge so that the cold air can flow out. But if you've got cold air coming down the opposite side of the valley, that hedge or barrier potentially prevents that coming up into your vineyard and flooding your vineyard. So really, in terms of what we do, very much depends on whether our clients are willing or wanting to invest in frost protection equipment. And we would recommend different types of frost protection equipment depending on the site and what vegetation or otherwise they've got around it.
What's the most common types in the UK of frost protection?
I think still one of the most common is bougies. So these are little candles that paraffin wax in a tin that you put out in between rows, and the number you put out depends upon frost risk and the area you want to protect. They're very popular, but they're quite labour intensive, not great for the environment, and they're quite expensive. And so now I think we're working with growers to try and move them onto automated devices or devices that the initial outlay is more expensive, but the payback's quicker over a 4 or 5 year period, and that are very effective in covering a larger area. So there are already things out there like frost busters, which are cold, warm air blowers, if you like, that you drive around. But now,
so you got it's like a fan heater on the back, isn't it?
Almost like a hot air, almost like a hairdryer on, that you're towing around.
You see them used to fill up big warehouses to warm.
Yeah.
Is that type of thing? It's just this big round thing, and it just
runs
pumps
off propane cylinders, and So you've got those. You've got wind fans. So these you see them more abroad, and now there's a company in the UK called Tow and Blow produce them, and they're great. I mean, you pull them into a spot that's preset, that they rise up, and what they will do is try and pull down. Well, they will pull down warm air from above the inversion layer to mix with the cooler air on the ground. And if you blow some of that cold air away, and they can cover a good area. They oscillate.
If you blow warm air down, does it not cancel out, plus and minus, it cancels out, or is it just displacing it and moving it, or a bit of both?
Bit of both. Predominantly what you're trying to do is mix the warm air with the cold air, by pulling that down. But it also has the potential benefit of displacing the cold air that's already there. So, those fan systems are very effective. We also have a piece of equipment that we sell called the cold air drains, and they are the opposite. You put them in the coldest area of the vineyard where the cold air accumulates, and they suck up that cold air and shoot that up to 90 metres above the inversion layer, where it mixes with the warmer air, becomes more buoyant, and stays up there.
Okay.
And in terms of...
that's trying to stop those bricks building up, isn't it? If you can...
Right. So what you're doing, in essence, is you're sucking out the cold air as it comes down, and you're shooting that up to allow the warmer air to take its place. They've only just come into the UK, but they're very effective. But the reason I mentioned
I haven't seen these before.
Cold air drains. Actually developed initially in Uruguay, at the University of Uruguay, now manufactured in California. There's about 3,000 of those worldwide, and just started bringing them into Europe now. But the reason both the air fans and the cold air drains are great is because they all have auto start functions on. So they don't require the manpower, they don't require going out and lighting bougies, etc., etc. That said, when we're assessing a site, there's lots of variables we have to consider before we'd recommend what goes where. It depends on the size, depends on budget, depends on risk within the site, depends on neighbours, no neighbours, etc., etc. So but the critical point here is there's lots of tools we can use. On some sites, we simply recommend putting in barriers to stop cold air coming into the site and clearing barriers at the bottom of the sites. And there's actually these are cultural practices that can be employed before we would recommend a purchase that is needed for equipment.
Yeah, so that's very simple, low cost.
Yeah, and it depends on the risk factor for the site.
Yeah. I noticed you mentioned neighbours. I presume fans and things like that are no good. And Marlborough's got a reputation for using helicopters, which keep the neighbours awake. And
it really depends. I mean, to be honest with you, that fans, cold air drains are a lot quieter than they used to be. The engine's more efficient. The housing's better. They're a lot quieter. I think in England previously there's been problems with the big static air fans because of the noise. So we do have to consider that. But we also have to consider the fact that, we're talking about these operating 2, 3, 4 times a year between sort of 4 in the morning and 5 in the morning.
Yeah.
You would hope that a neighbour would understand that, that they're there for the good of the business. Maybe a few bottles of wine in their direction would help alleviate any issues.
Whenever I go back home to New Zealand and Marlborough, it's funny, people move to Marlborough because they like the wine country and all that sort of stuff, and then they just don't like the fact that they need frost protection.
Yeah, I mean, helicopters are certainly noisy, but effective. The other one, we don't have them in the UK, is sprinkler systems.
Yeah, why is it? That's quite popular in France, isn't it?
They're probably the most effective frost protection mechanism out there. Okay, if you can spray vines with water, that releases latent heat, which gives you a good protection.
That's right, because as water freezes, it releases heat, which keeps the buds warm.
A bit counterintuitive, but yeah. The reason being we don't have irrigation systems in, and if we did, it uses an awful lot of water.
Does it? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the reason they're not used. Price, really.
Okay. Plus, like Wales, it might be more appropriate.
Yeah, but they don't need irrigation yet.
Yeah, but also, I remember going to Chablis and having a look at the not irrigation. It was for frost protection because you're not supposed to irrigate in Europe, so you can't have irrigation there. It's all frost protection. Although I'm sure they run their frost protection leaks terribly in dry season.
Makes you wonder. I mean, just putting water on the ground can help anyway. But I'm not up to date with the rules and regulations regarding frost protection in different appellations. But yeah, we've had a lot of interest, particularly for the cold air drains in Chablis and Champagne regions. Mm-hmm. I think frost levels are a little bit lower there than England, so risk is a little bit lower. It always comes back to looking at individual sites and what the risk is within the site and what's the best thing to do for that site.
There was something I saw years ago where they used to spray something on the vines. It was like a plastic or something.
Yeah, there's various polymer sprays out there now, and they're becoming talked about more and more. These are sprays that, and this is a critical point, if you're sure, if the forecast is accurate and you're going to get frost, some of the polymer sprays give a degree of protection, maybe a degree, maybe 2, maybe more, depending on the particular product. But you have to be pretty sure you're going to get a frost, because if you go out and spray them and they only last for X amount of time and you don't get a frost, you've just wasted a lot of money and manpower putting that on. Yeah. So I haven't seen much in the way of published R&D other than what's on manufacturers' websites, but I think we're hearing more and more about them. So not just polymer sprays, there are other products that are being developed that are in the pipeline to look at frost protection. That's great. Yeah, anything that's going to help it grow is great, and it just shows what a critical issue it is.
And so what are the worst areas in the UK for frost from a vineyard point of view?
Generally speaking, as you move inland from the coast, risk gets higher. But that is really general, and it really does come down to site-specific assessment. I've assessed sites in areas where you would think there might not be too much frost, generally warmer, let's say closer to London, where you get this kind of heat accumulation, but they're still getting frosted, and that's because of the topography of the site. That's because cold air is sinking into the site, and it's got frost hollows, pockets in that site. Yeah. So it's very hard to say. Very site-specific. The southwest, I suspect, is slightly less at risk. because of its coastal proximity and warmer currents and warmer air coming in from the southwest. But it's a generalisation.
I interviewed Peter Yeelans. He's a reasonably big producer in New Zealand these days.
Yeah.
And when he first started out his vineyard, he bought a chunk of land in Aotearoa, which is just south of the main growing area of Marlborough at the time. And his land was awful. It was just covered in all these ruts and things and all this sort of stuff. And he basically just got a bulldozer and he just terraformed the whole thing. He removed all the streams and everything where there could have been frost or anything like that. Do people think about that point of view? Because a couple of weeks on a bulldozer will change a chunk of land to be really nicely sculpted to manage things like frost.
Yeah, I haven't heard much of that happening in the UK. I mean, land certainly, generally speaking, it's prepared. I've been to a few sites where in England I've actually seen old bomb craters, and those bomb craters create those dips. Now, it depends what degree of, if you like, levelling needs doing. If you're talking about bringing in tons and tons of soil to level it, well, you're altering your soil structure, you're altering soil depth. So you might find that, that's going to cause issues further down the line. If it's just, skimming over the top foot of soil, that's a different ballgame. So all I would advise is, if you think there's a risk, speak to us or speak to your vineyard planting contractor. To see what needs doing. It could be that there's areas within potential sites that just need avoiding and leaving, and let their cold air sit in those sites. Almost use those sites as bait. Okay. No, actually that's true, isn't it? If you provide reservoirs for it, that's not necessarily a bad thing. All right, Alistair, I think we'll wrap it up there. Great, thank you very much.
Cheers very much, man. That's been brilliant.
Cheers, thank you.